Hello, this is Steve, your YouTube English teacher, with a speaking video today focusing on how to be more fluent. How do you organize your answer so you've always got something to say, so you never run out and go blank, so you give the impression that you could speak in English all day and you'd be happy doing that. Unfortunately, the exam is only 15 minutes, but you would love to chat about every topic for 2 hours. That's what being fluent means. And we can practice that with the exam technique in mind, which is what we're doing today. We're going to focus on speaking part 2 for a good reason. That is because you have to speak for 1 minute, which gives you the opportunity to really organize your answer clearly, and also the slight danger of sometimes just talking and talking and talking without a clear goal or without making it unclear what you're saying. So as we know, in speaking part 2 for B2 and C1, you are comparing photos and answering a question or questions, 2 questions for C1, which is what we're going to do in this video, because I think if you can do it at C1, then you can definitely do it at B2. So you have some photos like these and 2 questions. And as we know, we need to organize a 1 minute answer. We don't just want to start saying, oh, wow, I love getting my hair cut. It's actually really fun. And that's not what the question is. We've only got 1 minute, so we need to be very careful about what we're saying and how we say it. How do we do this? Well, I would say step 1 is using discourse markers. We're going back to the criterion here because they say you should use discourse markers to organize your answer. Discourse markers are the little phrases that we use in speaking to punctuate our ideas. Most people, myself included, don't speak perfectly fluently. I'm getting close. I'm trying harder every day. But unfortunately, we still say things like, well, like, so, and all these little phrases. And you should use these. Try and use them. Even if it sounds a bit artificial because it's in your second language, you have to practice doing this. It's definitely much better than being silent or than just saying, No. Instead of that, give it the, well, I guess, difficult question. But all of these little things, they're what we want to hear. So for example, on this speaking part 2 with these photos, your answer might start with, well, I guess a hairdresser has to be careful because people care a lot about their hair and they, want a professional, a good result. And it could be difficult because it's a hard job, and then we continue. But you notice the little discourse markers are indicating that I'm going to start making my point. They're indicating that I'm talking to the examiner, I'm engaging the examiner, and they're giving me a little bit of time to think of the ideas that I actually need to express to show I've got that level of English. So all of these little phrases, something you can practice, something you should be using in your speaking to help organize it. That's step 1. Step 2 is similar, but it's the more formal cohesive devices, as in prepositions, linking words, just like you've studied for writing, as I've mentioned in all of my videos. And at C1, we are not just using and, but, also typical linking words. We're trying to throw in some slightly more unusual ones, again, to show that we've got that range and to show that we can organize ideas in a slightly more nuanced way. Because maybe and is not quite the same as besides. You're implying that it's more of a slightly more emphasis on it. And besides, it's not just that, it's also that. So there's a bit more nuance on some of these linking words, which is why they're useful for organizing your answer. So what does that mean for photos like this? It means we might be saying things like, we've spoken about the hairdresser. Now a chef, on the other hand, needs to be careful since they're preparing something you will eat. So not only does it need to be tasty, but also hygienic and safe. So as we can see, I'm comparing and contrasting with, on the other hand, I'm not always saying because. I try and throw in a little since, as, for the reason that, you can play with it a little bit as long as it's still natural. And a not only but also instead of just and. So again, we're varying it. We're making it slightly more impressive with our linking words. Study them, try and use them, especially In part 2, where you know you're going to be comparing and contrasting, you know you're going to be talking about things that are similar and things that are different in the photos, so you can prepare your typical whereas, on the other hand, likewise, similarly, both photos. All of these are good cohesive devices. The final point that we need to make about organizing your answer is probably the most difficult one, and that is being relevant. Part of being fluent, of course, is having the ideas so that you can express them. We have to be careful because it's an English exam, not an ideas exam. You don't have to be an expert about the life of a chef and the hairdressing industry. That's not expected. But you do need to have some basic or typical ideas to show that you can express yourself and that you can speak English comfortably. Most people know what a hairdresser is and how it works, right? They get some scissors and they cut your hair because your hair is too long. Nothing too complicated. But then you need to be saying these typical ideas about the job of a hairdresser, the experience of a hairdresser, which you can probably imagine. The 2x2 maneuver is something I've mentioned before in my speaking part 2 videos, which is really useful for C1 because we have 2 photos and 2 questions. 2x2 is 4. There are 4 things you're going to say in your 1 minute. You're going to answer question 1 and question 2 for photo 1 and photo 2. So I'm imagining this in my head as I go through the exam. I'm imagining photo 1, hairdresser. Why careful? Well, we said this before, because people care a lot about their hair. Then we could even mention it's part of their identity. It gives them confidence. Once you've got your basic idea, hopefully, if you're in the right mood, if you're in that happy mood where everything's connecting and the neurons are firing, ideas start connecting and you say, oh yeah, people do care, because it gives them confidence. And then we also need a little idea for question 2. Why is it difficult? Well, for a hairdresser, it's a hard job. They're standing all day. Maybe it's repetitive, so it gets a bit boring. Maybe their wrists start to hurt. The ideas should start flowing. Similarly, now we can use our little linking word for the second photo. Well, as we said, a chef needs to be careful because people pay a lot. They expect tasty and hygienic food. And it could be difficult because there's a lot of pressure in the kitchen. You're working to a tight deadline. There's heat everywhere with all of the ovens on and the gas fires and all of these things. So clear ideas for your 4 points and then organize it into 1 minute and it should be nice and fluent. Here's another one for you to practice. Try and do this one. Here I have chosen 3 photos, so you need to choose 2 photos for C1, compare them, and talk about what might attract people to these hobbies and how they could get better at them. Time yourself in 1 minute, saying those 4 things like we practiced. Hopefully, you were saying some of these ideas that I'm going to show you, and you were using all the little tricks that we said, starting with, well, I guess rock climbing, I suppose. On the other hand, using all of your discourse markers and your linking devices to express those ideas. Ideas like maybe, what attracts people to rock climbing? You're overcoming a challenge. You're getting fit. You could get better by improving your strength, working on your strength and flexibility, maybe going to the gym, maybe doing yoga. Why do people play in a band? Well, they want to express their creativity, or they like hanging out with friends who have shared interests. And to get better, maybe they could experiment with new sounds or listen to lots of music to get inspiration. And what would attract someone to woodworking or carpentry or building things in their house, if we want to use different expressions? Definitely the satisfaction of making something yourself. Maybe the advantage of saving money because you've got lots of DIY skills, so you can build your own furniture. And how do you get better at it? You need better tools. And of course, you should be watching Matthias Wendel and other Frank Howard on YouTube with all their great tutorials where they're doing woodworking. So there we go, expressing these kind of ideas. And for a bonus, here's one more that you can do by yourself. This one I'm not going to tell you the ideas because, come on, you're a big boy now. You can express your own ideas. But choose 2 of the photos. How important is communication? What might they be talking about? We've practiced a lot. Speak for 1 minute. Enjoy. That's all for this video. Goodbye.